I'm going to make the points. And the reason I haven't moved is because I didn't leave the Labour Party to join another party. I left the Labour Party to shine a spotlight on the disgrace it's become under his leadership, and because I regard myself as proper, decent, traditional Labour, not like the extremists who've taken over this party and are dragging it into the mud. And that's the point I'm going to make in this debate. And I want to say this. These are people, the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Chancellor, these are people who've spent their entire time in politics, working with, defending all sorts of extremists, and in some cases terrorists and anti-Semites. Remember what these people said about the IRA. It might be ancient history to the Labour Party's new young recruits, but many people will never forget how they supported terrorists responsible for horrific carnage in a brutal civil war that saw people blown up in pubs, hotels and shopping centres. A few weeks after the IRA blew up a hotel in Brighton, murdered 5 people at the Tory party conference, the Leader of the Opposition invited 2 suspected IRA terrorists to Parliament. When the man responsible for planting that bomb was put on trial, he protested outside the court. The Shadow Chancellor said that, quote, those people involved in the armed struggle, people he said had used, quote, bombs and bullets, should be honoured. And they have the brass neck to lecture anybody about the rule of law. What a disgrace.
Mr. Speaker, in its handling of Brexit, this House has lost the respect of the country and made us a laughingstock around the world. Prolonged uncertainty, as much as no deal, can tip us into recession with disastrous consequences for jobs and for living standards. I hear high-minded speeches about protecting the Constitution and the propriety expected of government, and I accept there are a small number of members who are vehemently opposed to no deal, but would support Brexit with a fair deal. I also regret the fact that the government decided to prorogue this House, which was unnecessary as it was undesirable. But, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority on the opposition benches, when they claim support for an affirmative referendum and/or opposition to no deal, are determined to overturn the result of the referendum. They have displayed an increasing contempt for our duty as Democrats to respect and implement the result. They lecture others about democracy, accountability and our national interest, yet they are hell-bent on frustrating the will of the majority of the people as expressed in that referendum. And, Mr. Speaker, they should be honest. It is their objective to thwart Brexit in whatever the circumstances. Whatever the deal is put to this House, there are many, many people who will vote against it because they want to thwart the will of the people in terms of that referendum result. And it is many of the so-called progressives in this House who are fuelling right-wing extremism by showing contempt for the result, and the majority voted to leave. We asked the people and they gave us their decision to leave the European Union. I say that, Mr. Speaker, as a Remainer. One cannot be a selective Democrat who only respects democracy when it delivers your preferred result. And this goes to the root of the Leader of the Opposition's position tonight. He demands an election time and time again. But now, given the opportunity, he vetoes an election. Not because of the national interest or stopping no deal, but he knows he would lose that election. Not because of the vast majority of the values of decent Labour MPs and many Labour Party members, but because as a lifelong Eurosceptic, leading a party of Remainers, he's been caught out trying to have it both ways on Brexit time and time again. Because he does not have the leadership skills required at a time of so many challenges facing our country, and because his leadership has led to the party of anti-racism and equality becoming the party of institutionalised anti-Semitism. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that a majority of Jews in this country feel they would not be safe in the event of him becoming Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this House cannot stand up for the public interest or break its stalemate for over 3 years. Therefore, the national interest demands a general election. Then maybe, Mr. Speaker, a new House will be able to show the leadership that this country needs and it deserves. And it deserves to begin the process of rebuilding trust in this place and healing the scars of division in our society. And I hear some of my honourable friends saying, what about a by-election? Because that's what the momentum types in my constituency keep saying. I'm running away from the electorate by not having a by-election now I'm an independent. I'm voting for a general election tonight. I'm willing to face the people in my constituency, unlike too many of the people on these benches. And finally, Mr. Speaker, there were many tributes paid today, quite rightly, Mr. Speaker, to the way you have presided over this House. And I would like to add to that the work that you did for children with speech and language difficulties, which changed the lives of many families. But when I heard the speeches earlier, and they talked about how proud they were of this House of Commons, they're not living in the real world. My voters, my constituents, are not proud of this House of Commons. They think we've entirely lost the plot, Mr. Speaker. So the time has come for people to be honest with the British people. And that honesty means that we need to respect the result of that referendum. Otherwise, the alternative will be to fuel right-wing populism like we've never seen in the history of this country.
This is a debate about whether politicians can be trusted to obey the rule of law. And there's not a single Labour figure in the past, not a single one, who would have backed violent street protest, as the Shadow Chancellor did, when he called for, quote, insurrection to bring down the government, or praised rioters who he said had kicked the SHIT out of the Conservative Party's offices, or talked, well, she might not want to hear it, but I tell you this. Well, I'm not going over. Well, I've explained why I'm not going over there. But I tell you this. I'm here because because voters in Dudley North sent me here to represent them.
As a Labour representative.
And my views, and the things I stand up for, decency in politics, the rule of law, none of these things have changed, and everybody in Dudley knew exactly what I thought of these people at the last election. And I'll tell you this, and I'll tell the honourable lady this, I'm going to make absolutely certain that she's going to have to answer to her voters for these points at the next election. All right? Well, we'll see. Now,
you'll have to answer to yours.
Yeah, don't worry about that. And no other senior figure in the Labour Party's history, would have joked about lynching a female member of Parliament. They don't believe in the rule of law abroad either, Mr. Speaker. They always back the wrong side, whether it's the IRA or Hamas and Hezbollah, who they describe as friends. No previous Labour leader would have supported brutal totalitarian dictatorships like the ones in Cuba or Venezuela that have absolutely no regard whatsoever for the rule of law, and no previous Labour leadership would have allowed a party with a proud history of fighting racial prejudice to have been poisoned by racism, which is what's happened under these people. Racism against Jewish people, to the extent that members have been arrested on suspicion of racial hatred, that the party itself has become the first in history to be investigated under equalities laws by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. These people and the people around them are a million miles away from the traditional, mainstream, decent politics of the Labour Party. They have poisoned what was once a great party with extremism. They cannot be trusted with the institutions that underpin our democracy. They are completely unfit to lead the Labour Party, let alone our country.